Grace stared out the window of her classroom, watching as the last few students trickled out of the school gates. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty playground, a stark contrast to the bustling energy that had filled it just hours before. At 42, Grace had been teaching at Oak Ridge High for nearly 2 decades, finding fulfillment in shaping young minds and nurturing their potential. But lately, a restlessness had taken root in her heart, a yearning for something more that she couldn't quite define. The sound of a throat clearing behind her pulled Grace from her reverie. She turned to find Owen Matthews leaning against the doorframe, a stack of papers tucked under his arm. At 28, Owen was the newest addition to the English department, bringing with him a fresh enthusiasm that had breathed new life into the school. "Burning the midnight oil, Miss Lawson?" Owen asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Grace felt a flutter in her stomach, one that she immediately tried to quash. "Just finishing up some grading," she replied, gesturing to the pile of essays on her desk. "And please, I've told you before, it's Grace." Owen's smile widened as he stepped into the room. "Right, sorry. Old habits die hard, I guess. Mind if I join you? I've got my own mountain of papers to tackle." Grace hesitated for a moment. She enjoyed Owen's company, perhaps a bit too much, and spending time alone with him felt dangerous somehow. But the thought of returning to an empty house held little appeal, so she nodded, gesturing to an empty desk. "Be my guest. Misery loves company after all." Owen chuckled as he settled in, spreading out his work. "I wouldn't call grading Shakespeare essays misery. Challenging, maybe, but there's always something interesting to discover." Grace couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. It reminded her of her own early days of teaching, before the weight of routine and responsibility had dulled some of her passion. "You're right, of course. I suppose I've just been feeling a bit stuck lately." Owen looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Stuck how?" Grace sighed, struggling to put her feelings into words. "I don't know, like I'm going through the motions, maybe. Don't get me wrong, I love teaching, but sometimes I wonder if there's something more out there for me." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes. It's natural to question your path, to wonder about the roads not taken." "I suppose," Grace said, turning back to her grading, "but at my age, it feels a bit late for a major life change." Owen's laugh was warm and genuine. "Come on, Grace. You're hardly over the hill. There's still plenty of time for new adventures if that's what you want." Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It had been a long time since anyone had made her feel young and full of potential. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that Owen was not only her colleague, but also significantly younger than her. Any sort of romantic entanglement was out of the question. As the weeks passed, Grace found herself looking forward to these after-school grading sessions with Owen. They would discuss literature, share funny stories about their students, and occasionally delve into more personal topics. Grace learned that Owen had ended a long-term relationship just before moving to Oak Ridge, and that he harbored dreams of writing a novel someday. In turn, she found herself opening up about her own life, her divorce 5 years earlier, her grown daughter who lived across the country, and the nagging feeling that she had somehow lost herself along the way. "Have you ever thought about writing?" Owen asked one afternoon as they were packing up to leave. "You have such a way with words, and I bet you have some incredible stories to tell." Grace laughed, shaking her head. "Me? No, I've never really considered it. I wouldn't even know where to start." Owen's eyes lit up with excitement. "Why don't you come to the writing workshop I'm hosting at the community center next weekend? It's just a casual thing, but it might help spark some ideas." Grace hesitated, torn between her growing desire to spend more time with Owen and her fear of stepping outside her comfort zone. "I don't know, Owen. I'm not sure I'd fit in with a bunch of aspiring writers." "Nonsense," Owen said, his hand coming to rest on her arm. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through Grace's body. "Everyone has a story to tell. Just think about it, okay?" Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she watched Owen leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The next week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Grace found herself standing outside the community center on Saturday morning, her heart pounding as she debated whether to go in. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard Owen call her name. "Grace, you made it!" His smile was radiant as he jogged up to her. "I'm so glad you decided to come." Any thoughts of leaving vanished as Grace allowed Owen to guide her into the building, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The workshop was intimate, with only about a dozen participants gathered in a circle of chairs. Owen led them through a series of writing exercises, his enthusiasm infectious as he encouraged everyone to share their work. Grace surprised herself with the words that flowed from her pen. She wrote about her childhood in a small town, about the dreams she had set aside in favor of practicality, and about the longing for connection that had taken root in her heart. When it came time to share, Grace hesitated, but Owen's encouraging smile gave her the courage to read aloud. As she finished, she looked up to find the room silent, several participants wiping away tears. "That was beautiful, Grace," Owen said softly, his eyes shining with admiration. "You have a real gift." The rest of the workshop passed in a blur, but Grace felt as though something had awakened inside her. As they were cleaning up afterward, Owen approached her again. "A few of us usually grab drinks after these sessions," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Would you like to join us?" Grace knew she should say no. The growing attraction between them was becoming harder to ignore, and spending time together outside of school felt like crossing a line. But the thought of going home to her empty house was unbearable after the emotional high of the workshop. "I'd love to," she heard herself say, and the brilliant smile that lit up Owen's face made her heart soar. The small group settled into a cozy pub not far from the community center. As the evening wore on, people began to drift away until only Grace and Owen remained, deep in conversation. They talked about books they loved, places they dreamed of visiting, and the moments that had shaped their lives. "I can't remember the last time I connected with someone like this," Owen admitted, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "It's like I've known you for years." Grace felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I know what you mean. It's been a long time since I've felt so seen." Owen's hand found hers on the table, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "Grace, I know this is complicated, the age difference working together, but I can't deny how I feel about you." Grace's heart raced as she stared at their intertwined fingers. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to pull away, to end this before it went any further. But her heart, long dormant, was awakening with a force she couldn't ignore. "Owen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't. It's not. It wouldn't be right." He leaned in closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Why not? We're both adults. We're not hurting anyone. Don't we deserve a chance at happiness?" Grace closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the intensity of her emotions. When she opened them again, Owen's face was inches from hers, his eyes asking a silent question. In that moment, all of Grace's reservations melted away. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something passionate and urgent. It was as though a dam had broken, years of pent-up longing and desire pouring out in a torrent of emotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Grace felt dizzy with conflicting feelings of exhilaration and fear. "We should go," she said, her voice husky. "This isn't the place for whatever this is." Owen nodded, quickly settling their tab. As they stepped out into the cool night air, he took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Come back to my place?" he asked softly. "We don't have to do anything. I'm not ready for this night to end." Grace knew she was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to her safe, predictable life. The other was fraught with uncertainty and potential heartbreak, but also the promise of passion and renewal. Taking a deep breath, she made her choice. "Okay," she said, squeezing Owen's hand. "Let's go." The walk to Owen's apartment was charged with anticipation. They barely spoke, both lost in their own thoughts about what was unfolding between them. When they arrived, Owen fumbled with his keys, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that Grace found endearing. As soon as the door closed behind them, Owen pulled Grace into his arms, kissing her with a fervor that took her breath away. She responded with equal passion, her hands exploring the planes of his back, marveling at the strength she felt beneath his shirt. "Grace," Owen murmured against her lips, "are you sure about this? We can stop if you're not comfortable." Grace pulled back slightly, looking into Owen's eyes. She saw desire there, yes, but also genuine care and concern. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way, like she was precious and desirable. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I want this. I want you." What followed was a night of passion unlike anything Grace had experienced before. Owen worshipped her body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes, making her feel beautiful and wanted in a way she had forgotten was possible. They explored each other with eager hands and lips, discovering what brought pleasure and reveling in the connection between them. In the quiet moments after, as they lay tangled together in Owen's bed, reality began to creep back in. Grace felt a pang of guilt, thinking about how this would complicate their professional lives, about the judgment they would face if anyone found out. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Grace sighed, snuggling closer to him. "That this is going to be incredibly complicated, that we're probably crazy for doing this, that I'm too old for you and you'll eventually realize that and leave." Owen tightened his arms around her. "Grace, look at me." When she met his gaze, he continued, "I know this won't be easy, but what I feel for you, it's real. You're not too old for me. You're exactly who I want, exactly as you are." Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. "How can you be so sure? Owen, I'm almost old enough to be your mother. What will people say?" "Let them talk," Owen said fiercely. "All that matters is how we feel about each other. I've never connected with anyone the way I have with you. You make me feel alive, Grace. You inspire me to be a better man, a better teacher, a better writer. How can that be wrong?" Grace wanted desperately to believe him, but years of self-doubt and societal expectations were hard to shake. And what happens when you want children? When you realize you're missing out on experiences because you're tied to someone so much older? Owen sat up, pulling Grace with him. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "Grace, listen to me. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to face it with you. We'll figure out the details as we go. All I'm asking is that you give us a chance." Grace searched Owen's face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she felt something inside her shift. Maybe it was time to stop living by other people's rules and expectations. Maybe, just maybe, she deserved this chance at happiness. "Okay," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. "Let's give this a chance." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Grace felt as though she was living a double life, responsible teacher and mentor by day, passionate lover by night. She and Owen were careful to maintain a professional distance at school, but the stolen glances and subtle touches only added to the excitement of their budding relationship. As spring turned to summer, Grace found herself blossoming in ways she never expected. Inspired by Owen's encouragement, she began writing in earnest, pouring her heart onto the page in a way she never had before. She joined a local writing group, sharing her work and receiving feedback that bolstered her confidence. Owen, true to his word, remained steadfast in his devotion. He introduced Grace to his friends, proudly holding her hand and shutting down any raised eyebrows with a fierce protectiveness that made her heart swell. They spent weekends exploring nearby towns, picnicking in secluded spots, and talking for hours about their hopes and dreams. But as the new school year approached, reality began to intrude on their idyllic bubble. Grace knew they couldn't keep their relationship a secret forever, especially not in a small town where gossip spread like wildfire. The thought of facing her colleagues, of potentially jeopardizing the career she had worked so hard to build, filled her with anxiety. "We need to talk about what happens when school starts," Grace said one evening as they sat on Owen's balcony watching the sunset. "People are going to find out eventually. We need to be prepared." Owen took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I've been thinking about that too. I think we should be upfront about it. Go to the principal, explain the situation. We're not doing anything wrong, Grace. We're both consenting adults." Grace sighed, leaning her head on Owen's shoulder. I know, but that doesn't mean people won't judge us. What if they try to separate us? What if one of us has to leave? Then we'll deal with it, Owen said firmly. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I'm not giving up on us, Grace, not for anything. His words bolstered her courage, and when the first day of school arrived, Grace found herself standing beside Owen outside the principal's office. As they waited to be called in, Owen squeezed her hand reassuringly. Remember, he whispered, no matter what happens in there, I love you. We're in this together. Grace's heart swelled at his words. It wasn't the first time Owen had told her he loved her, but hearing it in this moment, as they prepared to face the consequences of their relationship, filled her with a sense of peace and determination. The meeting with the principal was tense but ultimately productive. While there were concerns about the potential for favoritism or conflict of interest, both Grace and Owen assured him that they could maintain a professional relationship at work. They agreed to a probationary period, with the understanding that if their personal relationship interfered with their duties in any way, one of them would need to transfer to another school. As they left the office, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That went better than I expected, she said, relief evident in her voice. Owen grinned, pulling her into a quick hug. See? I told you we could handle anything together. The news of their relationship spread quickly through the school, as they knew it would. There were whispers and stares, some disapproving looks from more conservative colleagues. But to Grace's surprise, there was also a great deal of support. Many of her fellow teachers congratulated her, telling her how happy she looked and how glad they were that she had found someone who appreciated her. The students, of course, were another matter. Teenagers, with their keen sense for drama and gossip, latched onto the story with relish. Grace overheard snippets of conversation in the hallways, giggles and speculation about her relationship with the hot new English teacher. It was uncomfortable at times, but Grace found that the joy and fulfillment she found with Owen far outweighed any temporary discomfort. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed passion, drawing on her own writing experiences to inspire her students in new ways. As the months passed, Grace and Owen settled into a comfortable rhythm. They maintained separate apartments, not wanting to rush into cohabitation, but spent most of their free time together. Grace's daughter, initially skeptical of the relationship, came around after meeting Owen and seeing how happy he made her mother. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, times when the age difference seemed insurmountable, or when the pressure of public scrutiny became overwhelming. But through it all, Grace and Owen remained committed to each other and to the love they had found. As their first anniversary approached, Grace found herself reflecting on the whirlwind year that had passed. She sat at her desk one afternoon, absently twirling a pen between her fingers as she gazed out the window. The school day had ended, and the hallways were quiet, save for the distant sound of the janitor's cart squeaking along the linoleum floors. A soft knock on the doorframe pulled her from her reverie. Owen stood there, a gentle smile on his face. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, stepping into the room. Grace returned his smile, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach that his presence still evoked. Just thinking about everything that's happened this past year, it's hard to believe how much has changed. Owen pulled up a chair beside her, taking her hand in his. "Good changes, I hope?" "The best," Grace replied, squeezing his hand. "I never imagined I could be this happy, this fulfilled at this stage in my life. You've given me so much, Owen." His eyes softened as he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You've given me just as much, Grace, more even. You've shown me what real love looks like, what it means to build a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding." Grace felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Even after a year, Owen's heartfelt declarations could still catch her off guard. She had spent so many years believing that passionate love was behind her, that she had missed her chance for the kind of connection she had always dreamed of. Owen had proven her wrong in the most beautiful way. "I have something for you," Owen said, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a small wrapped package and placed it on the desk in front of Grace. "Owen, our anniversary isn't until next week," Grace protested, even as her fingers itched to unwrap the gift. He chuckled, shaking his head. This isn't an anniversary gift, well, open it and you'll see. Curiosity piqued, Grace carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a book, a real published book with a beautiful cover. Her breath caught as she read the title. Second Chances, a novel by Grace Lawson. Owen, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Is this? He nodded, his eyes shining with pride. It's your book, Grace. The one you've been working on all year. I may have pulled some strings with a publisher friend of mine, but this is all you. Your words, your story. Grace ran her fingers over the embossed letters of her name on the cover, hardly daring to believe it was real. The novel had started as a series of writing exercises, a way to explore her feelings about love, loss, and rediscovery. Over time, with Owen's encouragement and the support of her writing group, it had evolved into a full-fledged manuscript. I can't believe you did this, she said, looking up at Owen with tears in her eyes. How did you even get a copy? I only just sent off the final draft last month. Owen grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. Like I said, I have connections, and I may have worked with the publisher to fast-track the process a bit. They're really excited about your book, Grace. They think it has real potential. Grace opened the book with trembling hands, flipping through the pages, her words, her story, printed and bound for others to read. It was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. Thank you, she said, pulling Owen into a tight embrace, for believing in me, for pushing me to pursue this dream. I couldn't have done it without you. Owen held her close, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. You had it in you all along, Grace. I just helped you see it. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Grace felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over her. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been obstacles to overcome, judgments to face, and moments of self-doubt to push through. But sitting here with the tangible proof of her accomplishment in her hands and the love of her life by her side, Grace knew that every challenge had been worth it. So, Owen said, pulling back slightly to meet her gaze. What's next for the newly published author, Grace Lawson? Grace laughed, shaking her head in wonder. I honestly don't know. I never thought I'd get this far. What do you think? Owen's eyes sparkled with excitement. Well, I was thinking, how would you feel about a little celebratory trip? There's a writer's retreat in Tuscany next month. 2 weeks of writing workshops, beautiful scenery, and amazing food. I thought it might be the perfect place to start working on your next book. Grace felt her heart skip a beat. Tuscany? Owen, that sounds incredible. But can we really take that much time off work? He nodded, grinning. I already spoke to the principal. He agreed that we both have more than enough personal days saved up, and he thinks it would be great publicity for the school to have a published author on staff. So, what do you say? Ready for a new adventure? Grace looked around her classroom, at the life she had built, and the comfortable routine she had maintained for so long. A year ago, the thought of jetting off to Italy for a writer's retreat would have terrified her. But now, with Owen by her side and a newfound confidence in her abilities, the idea filled her with excitement. Yes, she said, a bright smile spreading across her face. Let's do it. Let's go to Tuscany. As they left the classroom hand in hand, discussing plans for their upcoming trip, Grace marveled at how much her life had changed in just 1 year. She had found love when she least expected it, rediscovered her passion for writing, and was now embarking on a new chapter as a published author. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Grace was excited about the unknown. With Owen by her side and a world of possibilities stretching out before her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges and adventures lay ahead. As they stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, Grace squeezed Owen's hand, feeling a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought him into her life. Whatever the future held, she knew that they would face it together, writing their own love story one day at a time.